There is a specific chilling phenomenon in clinical psychology called hypervigilance-induced dissociation. It's what happens when a human being is subjected to such consistent high-stakes terror that their brain literally splits to survive. Today I'm comparing the reactive trauma of the Menendez brothers to the predatory ambition of the Bever brothers to answer the ultimate question: how does a sibling bond turn lethal? They aren't living in the present. They're living in a state of constant biological anticipation of death. Their amygdala, the brain's alarm system, is permanently stuck in the on position, flooding the system with cortisol and adrenaline until the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic and long-term planning, effectively goes offline. In 1989, Lyle and Eric Menendez walked into their Beverly Hills mansion and committed a crime that the 90s media labeled as greed. But as a licensed professional counselor with over 2 decades of experience looking at family systems, I don't see a bank heist. I see a total systemic collapse. Today we're going to do a deep dive, but we're doing it with a clinical intensity you won't find on a standard true crime channel. I'm comparing the Menendez brothers, the gold standard for reactive trauma, against a much darker modern sibling pair, Robert and Michael Bever. We're going to analyze the red flags that were missed then and the digital pathology that we see now. If you want to understand why some siblings protect each other while others turn into lethal feedback loop, you're in the right place. Before I go deeper, I want to be clear about why we're looking at this through a clinical lens. As an LPC, my job isn't to just look at a crime scene. It's to look at the internal architecture of the people involved. When I see a case like the Menendez brothers, I'm looking for enmeshment. I'm looking for the way a parental dictator can effectively deprogram their children's empathy and replace it with a singular, desperate goal: survival. I also want to be clear, this is my speculation. It's not a clinical diagnosis of anyone involved in these cases. The 90s didn't have this vocabulary. They didn't understand complex PTSD or the way chronic abuse shrinks the prefrontal cortex. They just saw 2 guys in tennis sweaters buying Rolexes. But you and I, we're going to look at the check engine lights that were flashing for years before the first shot was fired. This is about more than just a trial. It's about the evolution of how we understand a human breaking point. Let's talk about the perfect family image. Jose and Kitty Menendez were the definition of success. But in my practice, whenever a family looks that curated, my clinical spidey senses goes off. Why? Because humans are messy. Perfect is a mask. In my experience, the more rigid the exterior, the more volatile the interior. In the Menendez household, that mask was maintained through coercive control. Jose wasn't just strict. If the allegations are true, and the modern evidence suggests they were, he was a domestic tyrant who used psychological, physical, and sexual dominance to erase his sons' identities. From an object relation standpoint, Jose didn't see his sons as autonomous humans. He saw them as extensions of himself. When an extension fails to perform, the host, Jose, reacts with narcissistic rage. When Lyle and Eric failed to meet his impossible standards, they were just grounded. They were psychologically and allegedly physically eviscerated. When you erase someone's identity, you leave a vacuum. For Lyle and Eric, they filled that vacuum with each other. Their bond wasn't a normal brotherly connection. It was a trauma bond. They weren't just brothers, they were cellmates in a gilded cage. In therapy, we often use the Karpman drama triangle to map out the dysfunctional relationships. In the Menendez home, Jose was the persecutor. The sons were the victims. But the role of the rescuer was empty until the brothers stepped into it for each other. This is the moment a sibling bond becomes dangerous. When Lyle decided he had to rescue Eric from the alleged abuse, he wasn't acting as a brother. He was acting as a desperate protector in a war zone. This creates a us versus them mentality that is incredibly hard to break. The 90s jury saw a conspiracy to commit murder. I see a shared survival strategy. When two people are trapped in a room with a predator, they don't look for the exit. They look for a way to stop the predator. Their logic was warped by years of gaslighting and fear. They truly believed that if they didn't kill their father would kill them. Whether that was an objective reality doesn't matter as much as the fact that it was their psychological reality. I have to push back on the greed narrative that dominated the 90s trial. The prosecution pointed at a spending spree, the cars, the watches, the clothes, and said, this is the motive. But let's look at this through the lens of a manic defense. When a victim of long-term high-pressure abuse is suddenly free, they don't act logically. Their brain is flooded with chaotic surge of dopamine and adrenaline. They weren't buying a Rolex because they wanted to know the time. They were buying it because they were trying to ground themselves in a reality where they finally have power. It's a manic dissociative attempt to fill the void left by their trauma. If they were the criminal masterminds killing for money, they would have been much better at hiding it. Instead, they acted like two people whose executive function had completely collapsed. They were in a state of post-traumatic shock. So I've established the reactive side. We've seen how fear can fuse two brothers together into a lethal unit. But what happens when the bond isn't forged in fear? What happens when it's forged in shared grandiosity? Now let's pivot to a case that makes the Menendez brothers look like a study in tragedy. We're going to Oklahoma in 2015 to meet Robert and Michael Bever. They didn't kill to escape a monster. They killed because they wanted to be the monsters. We're going into the void of empathy, and I'm going to show you the clinical difference between a fracture and a predator. Stick with me, because this is where the analysis gets really dark. If the Menendez brothers were about siblings bonding to survive a fire, the Bever brothers are about siblings bonding to start one. Robert and Michael Bever were 18 and 16 years old when they murdered 5 members of their family. They didn't have a Jose Menendez figure. They didn't have a history of systemic abuse that forced their hands. They had something else: shared malignant narcissism. I want to tackle these modern pathologies because they are becoming more common in our digital age. The Bevers represent the ultimate clinical failure, the shared delusion of grandeur. This isn't just about a crime, it's about a psychological mutation. In the Menendez case, there was an ocean of emotion: shame, terror, and eventually public grief. Even if you don't believe their story, you can see the emotional weight that they carried. In the Bever's case, we see a clinical flattening of affect. When you watch the interrogation tapes of Robert Bever, you don't see a broken man. You see a smirk. In psychology, we call this Dupert's delight. It's a subtle, almost invisible flash of satisfaction that a deceptive or antisocial person shows when they feel that they have successfully manipulated their audience or achieved their goal. As an LPC, I look at this and see a complete bypass of the mirror neuron system. Most humans are neurologically wired to feel the pain of others. Robert and Michael had successfully unwired themselves. They didn't view their parents and siblings as people. They viewed them as experience points in a quest for notoriety. This is the hallmark of antisocial personality disorder. But what makes it unique here is that it was a shared pathology. The technical term for this is folie deux, or a shared delusion. In the Menendez case, the brothers shared a delusion of imminent danger. In the Bever case, they shared a delusion of legendary status. Robert and Michael lived in an isolated home, but it wasn't the isolation of abuse. It was the isolation of digital radicalization. They spent their time in the dark corners of the internet, idolizing mass shooters like they were celebrities. Their bond wasn't built on protecting Lyle or protecting Eric. It was built on mutual validation of evil. In my practice, I've seen how group polarization works. When two people with similar fringe ideas get together, They don't balance each other out. They push each other to the extreme. They one-up each other's darkness until the unthinkable becomes the inevitable. This is the core of my analysis today, the sibling feedback loop. In a healthy relationship, if one brother says, "I want to do something violent," the other brother acts as a reality check. They provide the moral friction necessary to stop the impulse. But in a codependent predatory bond, that friction is gone. Robert provided the vision, and Michael provided the validation. They weren't reacting to a threat. They were building an identity. They planned to go on a cross-country killing spree, seeing their family as merely the first step. From a clinical perspective, this is a total malignant regression. They had retreated so far into their own shared fantasy world that the lives of their own brothers and sisters, who were innocent children, became abstract concepts. To look at the logic of these two sets of brothers, it's a common thought that these killers are evil geniuses. But I see the opposite. I see a massive failure of social intelligence. The Menendez brothers thought they could kill their parents and then just hang out at the mall and buy tennis gear. But the Bever brothers thought they were going to become national legends by attacking their family with knives in the suburban house with neighbors just yards away. They were arrested almost immediately because they didn't understand the reality principle. They truly believed that the world will react to them the way they reacted to themselves. It's a level of psychological immaturity that is almost hard to grasp until you see it through a clinical lens. They weren't masterminds. They were children playing with lethal reality they didn't understand. So what does this tell us about our world now? In the 90s, we didn't have the stomachs for nuance. You were either a good kid or a monster. We failed the Menendez brothers because we couldn't see the trauma architecture behind their actions. We were blinded by their wealth and their perfect family mask. But with the Bever brothers, we face a new challenge. We have to be careful not to pathologize away their choices. As a counselor, I have to draw a hard line here. Explanation is not an excuse. We can explain that they were isolated and radicalized, but we must also hold the space for the fact that they chose predatory aspiration over human connection. One brotherly bond was formed to stop the pain. The other was formed to spread it. And that is the fundamental difference that we as a society are finally starting to understand. The Menendez brothers were a fracture, a psyche breaking under the weight of an external monster. The Bever brothers were an evolution, a psyche growing in its own claws in the dark. Understanding these clinical indicators isn't just about true crime. It's about prevention. It's about recognizing when a family system is rotting or when a sibling bond is turning into a lethal feedback loop. If you value this kind of deep dive professional analysis, you're going to love my next clinical breakdown of this human behavior in this next true crime analysis. I'm John Cordray, and I'll see you in my next clinical breakdown. Good day and good night.